Hi, my name is Heriberto Ayala, also known as Tito.
Hi, my name is Gabriel Cowan. We're here with the California-Nevada JATC.
In this series of videos, we're going to be talking about chainsaw safety. So remember, before starting any type of work, make sure you're always wearing your proper PPE, which includes your hard hat or helmet, your earmuffs, earplugs, safety glasses, gloves, proper high vis, your chaps, and proper footwear.
You also want to make sure your chain is tight, it's sharp, that you have mixed fuel and oil for your saw. From here, we're going to jump into the safety features of the chainsaw. Tito, would you like to tell us about that?
Yeah, so remember, when you guys are checking your chainsaw, it's always recommended follow a sequence. If you're going to start from one end, work your way around the chainsaw until you get back to the same part where you finished off or where you started. So on this, we're going to start with the chain brake. So on the chain brake, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to inspect your chain brake, make sure it's not cracked, broken, the screws are in place, and that everything is functioned correctly.
Okay. Tito, would you like to tell us any more about the chain brake?
Yeah, so on the chain brake, make sure that when you're going to apply it and take it off, make sure you're doing it properly. So when you're going to disengage the brake, make sure the thumb is on the handle. Take the brake off like this. To engage it, you're going to do it with your wrist to engage it. You never just want to take the brake off this way, or you never want to apply the brake that way. The reason for is if your hand slips, it's going straight to the chain, and you could accidentally cut yourself real bad. So that's the reason why we want to make sure we're applying it correctly. Okay, so also another way to check your chain brake to make sure it's working correctly, you could disengage it, roll it on a log, apply the brake. Now it's not moving, then you know your brake is working correctly. Okay, from there we're going to end up jumping into, which is your part of your muffler. Make sure it's all nice and tightened, all the screws are in place, and make sure that spark arrestor, that's very important that it's in there. It's always recommended to clean it every so often to make sure it doesn't get a lot of gunk or carbon. And you'll notice right away on your chainsaw if it is kind of dying out, it's losing power. Most of the time it's because of that. So just make sure that it has the spark arrestor and that you're constantly cleaning it to make sure it's nice and clean. Okay, from there, I'm going to end up jumping to the chain catch. On the chain catch, you want to make sure that the screw's in place and that the chain catch is folded inwards, not outwards. If not, it's not giving you any protection in that point. And make sure, if it's getting more than 10% wear, it's probably about that time you start checking it. It might be time to get it replaced. So let your supervisor know, your GF, anybody like that maybe you'll get that replaced. From here, I'm going to end up jumping into the handguard, which is still part of the function of what the chain catch does for your protection. On the handguard, you want to make sure that it's not cracked, it's not broken, and that it's in good working conditions. Gabe, anything else you want to add?
Yeah, could you tell me more about the function of the rear handguard?
Okay, so for the rear handguard, the importance of it, especially on these bigger chainsaws, especially when they're long, sometimes if the chain falls out, the chain catch won't catch it, and that chain could actually whip. And that's what that's doing. It's to protect your hand so you don't get cut and you have that extra protection on there. So that's the reason why you want to make sure it's intact, it's in place, it's not broken, to have that extra added protection. Okay. All right, from there, we're going to end up going to the throttle lock. The throttle lock, that's very important. For the reason for is that you want to make sure if you're trying to push the accelerator that you can't push it unless you put the interlock, and then you could accelerate. Okay, the reason for on that, what you're going to want to inspect is make sure that it's not cracked, it's not broken. We work around a lot of trees that have sap. Sometimes it gets stuck and that little spring won't spring it back. So it's very important that you guys are always constantly checking it to make sure it's working. Because if it's not working, and let's put a scenario, let's say that you're climbing a tree, you're moving around the tree, you accidentally forget to put that brake on, a limb goes in there, hits it, now the chain's going to go, and now you're in danger that you could cut yourself. So that's the reason why we want to make sure that interlocked, it's always working, and make sure we can't engage it until we push it. And then that's the reason why we check that every day. Okay. From there, we're going to go to the off and on switch. You want to make sure that it's working correctly, that when you want that chainsaw to turn off, it turns off. When you put the choke, that all that is working correctly. And the same thing, you want to make sure it's not cracked, broken, full of sap, that it's sticking and it's not working. Okay, so from here we're going to end up jumping now to the handle. So on the handle, you want to make sure your screws are in place, that it's not broke, it's not cracked, and also the screws on this side, make sure they're all in its where they're supposed to be. Since we're already here, we're also going to check the anti-vibration springs, which there's one here and there's also one on the bottom. You want to make sure that those are there as well. Gabe, anything else you want to add?
Tito, can you tell us more about what the anti-vibe is for?
So yeah, so the anti-vibrations, I like to put it in this way as this concept. It's like the shocks on your cars. Imagine if your shocks were shot, you're going to feel every bump on the road. So what the anti-vibration does is, as when you're cutting with the chainsaw, it vibrates in your hand to have less wear and tear on your muscles, your joints, your ligaments, all that. So that's the reason why they're there for. Okay. The next thing we're going to want to check is going to be all your covers. There's going to be 3 covers. So we'll have this cover over here. Make sure that it's in good conditions, that it's not cracked. Make sure those teeth are not exposed here where you could be in danger of cutting yourself. Make sure all the bolts, they're all nice and tight. And there you're going to want to check up here in the top where it covers basically your motor and your air filters there. Make sure all those bolts are there as well, and that it's not cracked, it's not broken, anything that could be exposed. And the last one, we're going to check this cover on this side. Same thing, the bolts are in place. Make sure it's nice and tight and that it's not cracked, because there's rotating parts here. So make sure that that's not broke or cracked or anything like that as well. Okay.
Tito, can you show us the proper way to start a chainsaw?
Yes, so there's 2 ways to start the saw. You know, there's going to be the ground start and the leg lock. So we'll demonstrate it now. All right, so the first one, we're going to start with the ground start. So just remember, before you're going to start your saw or anything, make sure anybody that's around you is minimum 10 feet away from you as you're going to start the saw. Okay, so for the ground start, before you start, you always want to make sure your brake is always going to be engaged. So you could disengage it, apply it, and make sure it's always there. Okay, then from there, what you're going to want to do, you can put your foot in the rear handguard to kind of stabilize it. Your left hand is always going to go on the handle, and you're going to want to lock it in place. You don't want it bend, make sure it's locked. From there, what you're going to want to do is make sure you're nice and stable before you start it, and technically that'll be your 3 points of contact. Your foot, the chainsaw on the ground, and your left hand locked in place. That's your 3 points of contact. Then from there, make sure you're always wearing your earplugs or your ear muffs. Engage them, and then go ahead, and then we can start the saw. So the second way to start the chainsaw, it'll be known as the leg lock. Okay, so on the leg lock, what you're going to want to do is make sure one leg is out to the straight, another one off to the side. Okay, you want to make sure that your hand is at the 45-degree mark and locked. The reason why you want the 45-degree is because when you're going to pull the cord out, it comes out nice and straight. If you have it straight and you're pulling, what happens is that cord, when you pull, it rubs against there, and that's the reason why sometimes they rip or whatever. The other reason why is also when you start at a 45-degree angle, and let's say something were to happen that you tripped or anything, you're out of the line of fire and that chain is coming off to the side instead of doing it straight where it could come straight at you. So that's the reason why you always want to hold it at that 45-degree angle. Also, before you start the saw, make sure you have your PPE. So make sure you have your earplugs on before you start. Okay, like we said, at a 45-degree angle, your legs locked, and then you could go ahead and start the saw. So now we're going to jump into the 4 forces of the chainsaw bar. Okay?
The 4 forces of the chainsaw bar, the top of your bar would be push, the bottom of your bar is pull, this is the attack, and this is the kickback.
Okay, do you mind demonstrating how the forces react on a log?
Yeah, sure. Remember, PPE at all times. Make sure your chain brake is engaged. Your hands are on the saw properly with your thumbs locked. And now we're going to demonstrate the push. When you're using the push portion of your bar, it pushes the saw towards you. Now we're going to demonstrate the pull. When you're using the pull, it pulls the saw into the wood. Now we're going to demonstrate the attack portion and the plunge cut. And remember, never to use the kickback portion of your chainsaw blade, because if you do, it will kick back up at you. Just remember, after each cut, apply the brake when the chainsaw idles down. If you're going to be moving with the chainsaw, make sure you apply your chain brake. That's in your left hand and your bar facing backwards, but make sure to turn your saw off if you're going to be moving around. So just remember, whenever you're going to be using a chainsaw, make sure you're wearing all your PPE and your chainsaw is in good working order.
And remember, of all things, safety first.